We are there to make the area safe, not necessarily clean. So if there is a lot of blood spillage, we're not going to spend hours trying to get the stains out the carpets. We're cutting the carpet up, we're taking it out, it's going to be incinerated. The same would go for sometimes a body decomposition. If somebody's fallen onto the floor when they've passed away and then haven't been found immediately, if they've started to compose, sometimes they might have gone into the floorboards. You're cutting away the floorboards in those circumstances. The umbrella of biohazard is huge, and the variety of work that we do is very vast. So it could be anything from a sewage leak to an unattended death to a needle sweep or where drug paraphernalia clean up, or a trauma or crime scene. And so anybody could be our potential client. People tend to think of the obvious, we must be working with the police or the local authorities, but actually anybody could have a family member have an accident or an unattended death. We try to talk to our local funeral directors, our local authorities, so people in our local area know who we are and what we do. Try and sort of break into different types of the industry that way. But really, even if you're a private landlord, if somebody gets attacked in one of your properties or passes away in one of your properties, it might just literally be a private landlord needs to clean up so that they can make their rental safe for the next occupant. So a crime scene is obviously where a crime has been committed. Usually it involves blood spillage. A trauma can be a very similar type of clean, but it's not always a crime that's been committed. It could be somebody's had an accident, hit their head or had an illness at home. And then a biohazard is any kind of cleanup where bodily fluids are involved. And that's not necessarily a blood or a trauma. It could be feces, vomit, urine, body decomposition fluid, any kind of fluid that could be a biohazard. Any kind of bodily fluid could potentially contain bloodborne pathogens or viruses, diseases, and depending on the circumstances, they can live for days or even weeks after. So, for example, there are some viruses that can live in vomit for 8 weeks, and people just don't know about this, then might not be aware, and it's definitely not safe for people to be cleaning up without the correct training and the correct equipment. Quite often we hear stories where people have had to clean up after their own family member has either passed away unattended, maybe not found immediately and their body started to decompose, or family members had a trauma or died in traumatic circumstances, and the families are left to deal with this and clean it up on their own because they don't realise that there is a service available. And from a psychological point of view, it is extremely traumatic and it can have long-term effects. So I've heard first-hand people that actually have PTSD years later from doing that kind of clean-up, and they just really shouldn't have been doing that. Hoarding is so much more common than I ever realised. You see the documentaries on TV, you think it's quite rare, it's really common, and don't think the pandemic's helped that, because a lot of people isolated themselves and it's triggered people to hoard things like food. We get a lot of referrals from like I say, social services and wellbeing organisations, and quite often the hoarder has been sort of found out. They isolate themselves quite often, they're estranged from their families, they don't let the neighbours go round, and they live in secret because they know really that the way they're living isn't quite how they should be living, and it's quite unsafe. They're in a little bit of denial as well of how bad it gets, so they isolate themselves so that nobody else can intervene. And quite often by the time we get called in, it's part of what they call a multi-agency intervention. And that's where they've been found out by, maybe they've had to call an ambulance and the paramedics have reported it, or they've had to have their boiler inspected, something like that. Somebody's had to go in, raise the alarm, phone social services or local authority, and then quite often the house will be condemned. Sometimes the environmental agency get involved, sometimes the fire brigade get involved to determine the fire risk aspect, And if it's severe enough, they will be forced to have the work done, and then the social services contact us to go in as part of that team. But it's a really, really sensitive, delicate subject, because quite often the people that are living there, they actually don't want the work doing, and they don't want you to go in and clear them up and throw away all their things. So it can be part of the process. A huge part of the process is building the trust with the person whose house it is, making them feel that they are still in control of the situation, even though they're being forced to have it done, letting them let you work, helping them let you work in their house. It can be quite time consuming. It's much, much easier when the hoarder is actually out of the equation. Sometimes that is the case. Maybe they've passed away and we're working with the family. It's a much less delicate and quicker process, because usually the families just want the house cleared. I've done many jobs where I've had to climb my way in. You can't even get through the front door. You're climbing your way in, and then some of the rooms are boarded up, like with stuff at the doorway, so you have no idea what's even in the room, because you have to dig your way into the room. And it's fascinating what people hoard, because some hoarders don't hoard things like belongings. They are literally just hoarding rubbish. So it could be floor to ceiling rubbish, takeaway boxes, cans, bottles, newspapers, junk mail, rotten food. It could be that they're actually quite clean and tidy. They've just got a lot of stuff, but it's to the extreme. It's not like a collector would have a hobby of, oh, I've got lots of teapots. It's, again, floor to ceiling. I can't get in this room because there is so much X, Y, Z. But sometimes they are brand new things in their packaging, and they've got Amazon delivery coming to the door every day, just delivering more and more and more things. And we have done a lot of hoarders clearances where there's been hundreds of unopened packages. You do hear of people being sort of buried under things. I mean, some of them, when they've literally got a little corridor, and quite often they're elderly people and their mobility is not great anyway. If they're shuffling along or climbing over things, it's probably very, very common that things fall down on top of them. That is where a fire hazard or fire brigade would intervene. So it's not just about, is this house going to set on fire or collapse? It's about the exit routes, the chance that they could literally be buried. And if they're living alone and they get buried under 3 tons of newspaper, they're not going to get out of that. It's just a case of eventually somebody finding them. And it's not a good situation to be in. Yeah, most of them have rodent infestation. Mice and rats is the obvious. Depending on the severity of how long things have been left, you can get some severe spiders. But I'm talking like decades of cobwebs. So sometimes, they've really, really left to thrive. Some of the footage that I've put on TikTok, people think that it's in Australia or something because the size of the webs. And actually, if left to thrive in our country, spiders can, I'm talking years and years. If left alone, they will just do their thing and create huge webs. And it's unbelievable, really, when you see it, because most households will every now and again dust the cobwebs away or hoover them up. But a hoarder house, they keep everything. Again, every case is a bit different. It's very complex, but some hoarders literally want to keep the cobwebs. They are emotionally attached to every single thing in that house, whether it's dirt, whether it's rotten food, whether it's urine, faeces, cobwebs. I've been to one house where the lady was feeding the rodents because they were part of her environment, and I don't know if they probably emotionally attached to them, bit of company. She had absolutely no problem with them being there. She quite liked them being there, and she was feeding them. We were there trying to clean up, and she's there feeding the rodents, so it can be quite complicated from time to time. You have to be very delicate, but sometimes it's a bit frustrating. It's very complex, and every case is completely different, but just from experience, although they do know really that they shouldn't be living like that, which is why they do isolate themselves. They are in a little bit of denial of the severity. So they don't quite realise how unsafe it is. Where we walk in and see huge hazards all over the place, clutter, fire risks, maybe rodent infestations, extreme levels of dirt. To them, that is their normal, and it's become their life, and they've probably spent decades creating that environment for themselves to live. For them to be forced to have the work done, and then we turn up in our white suits and all our PPE and start, as far as they're concerned, throwing their things away. It depends on the type of clean. So biohazard and sort of trauma cleaning is very different to domestic cleaning. We are there to make the area safe, not necessarily clean. So if there is a lot of blood spillage, we're not going to spend hours trying to get the stains out the carpets. We're cutting the carpet up, we're taking it out, it's going to be incinerated. The same would go for sometimes a body decomposition. If somebody's fallen onto the floor when they've passed away and then haven't been found immediately, if they've started to compose, sometimes they might have gone into the floorboards. You're cutting away the floorboards in those circumstances. You're not necessarily trying to clean. Every circumstance is completely different, but it's more of a safety clean up than we've got to get the stains out kind of clean up. Most things will end up being incinerated. But when it's blood spillage up the walls and things like that, we might even end up repainting as part of the service. We can do that. We sanitise and fully clean everything down. But depending on the surface, there might still be staining. So then we would offer, actually, do you want us to paint this wall, or do you want to come back? If it's someone's child that's passed away in a traumatic circumstance, they don't want to see that blood staining, even if it's safe and sanitised. So we'd offer to paint the wall, or try and make it so on the eye it's back to how it was. Sometimes the people can be hostile if they don't want you there and they're being forced to have the work done. They don't want you there. They can be. Never felt genuinely scared, but there's houses that I won't go to without a team of people. Most of the jobs are big enough that it warrants a team of people anyway. But even when we're going out quoting, sometimes we'll go in pairs. Sometimes we'll get a bit of a heads up from social services or whichever local authorities contacted us. They might say, oh, just, don't go on your own because he's a bit grumpy about having to have the work done. I don't know if he'll be very welcoming. And you just have to be a little bit careful, particularly being female. We don't want to put ourselves in any dangerous situations. So we just need to be a little bit mindful. I think it definitely takes a certain type of person to do the job. It's definitely not for everybody. Sometimes you do have to zone out a little bit and just sort of not think too deep about what it is you're actually cleaning up, because some of the scenarios are upsetting. And I think if you think too much into it, it wouldn't be a very long time on the job before it would take a mental load on yourself. But yeah, from a fear point of view, I haven't been really scared on a job. Like, I'm not scared of the rats or the spiders. I've never been to a property where I've felt like my life was in danger. That probably will happen. I imagine that I will get called to a job where I don't feel safe. We did get called to one property. A gentleman had some needles pushed through his letterbox. And we were asked to go and retrieve them. But we got the call at about midnight, and it was on a council estate and it was in a block of flats. So I rang my business partner and said, do you want to come with me? We were there about 5 minutes. It wasn't a physically demanding job where we needed 2 people. But I didn't feel like I wanted to go to a block of flats in the middle of the night to retrieve needles. I didn't even know who had put them there. They might have still been around. They could have been faced with a hostile situation. So again, you do have to just be a little bit mindful, mentally risk assess as you go along. But I'm sure there will be situations that absolutely terrify me the longer I'm in the job. The training that I did was a 3-day, and it was a classroom environment, which worked for me because I like to learn hands-on. I like to do the practical side. There are online courses that you can do, but for me, I don't think just reading about something or watching a video about something is going to give me the confidence to then feel like I can go and actually do the job. Whereas the course that I did, it was 3 days in a classroom, but it was very practical at every step. So we learnt about needle sweeps, then we went and did a mock-up needle sweep. And then there was learning about how to clean up after a road traffic collision, out in the car park, Dolmio on the tarmac. They even tell you how to fix a water pipe if you accidentally go through the water pipe while you're cutting the floorboard. So it's very detailed, and yeah, it's a very intense 3 days. I think it could even be longer. And you learn all about the practical side, but also a lot about the business side, risk assessments, method statements, all the insurances you need, the licenses you need. It's a very in-depth course, and you do need, obviously, special insurances, license to remove the biohazard waste. You asked about vaccinations, so all of your hepatitis vaccinations need to be up to date as well. You shouldn't be coming into contact with the blood if you're doing the job properly. You've got your method and your PPE to protect you from all of that. But worst case scenario, if you were to get contaminated in any way, you've got your vaccination as a sort of last line of defence. I'm still really early in my crime scene cleaning business journey. I definitely don't think I've seen my worst clean up yet. I don't think I've experienced hearing some of the stories from the lads that we did the training with and knowing what I'm actually trained to do. I still haven't experienced all of that yet. But one of the ones where I thought, wow, this is quite as severe was a gentleman that actually been stabbed in a property. The blood spillage was quite intense, put it that way. I don't know if there's been an artery severed or something without going into too many gory details, but it was sprayed up the walls. He walked around the house trying to get himself some help, probably. So that was a big clean up. Yeah, so I've got a work van that's got most of the kit that we use most commonly already in the van. Sometimes you get information about a job before you get there, so you can plan ahead a little bit. Sometimes you have no idea what you're walking into, so most bases are covered with the kit that's in the van. I would do a risk assessment on entering the property. Sometimes you can't do a full risk assessment because you don't know all the risks until you actually start the job. For a hoarder house, for example, every sort of step of the way you're discovering new risk factors, so you can't do an initial risk assessment that's going to be thorough enough for the entirety of the job, but sometimes you can if it's a needle sweep or something like that. Yeah, so day to day I need to make sure that I've got plenty of the white suits, never run out of those. The masks are a staple, always make sure I've got a few of those on the van. Plenty of gloves, get through so many gloves, and the blue overshoes. And then sharps boxes, need to make sure I've always got a couple of empty sharps boxes. Pickers, we obviously use quite a lot of pickers. The chemical, the main chemical that we use, obviously don't want to run out of that. And then there are other chemicals that I don't necessarily need to use every day, so I'd have them in not necessarily in the van, but if I know that I'm going to a certain clean that might need something else, I can take it along. But yeah, every job's completely different, so blue roll, we use a lot of blue roll. We use that for a lot of the cleanup, so it can be disposed of. And the bags, the waste removal bags, the yellow and orange bags, and the tape to cordon off any areas that might be public. You don't want to end up, somewhere where somebody can walk into your cleaning zone because they've strolled past. So we have masks with A1P3 filters in, which do kind of mask out 95% of the smell, which helps, but then quite uncomfortable to wear, especially for a long period of time. Sometimes I put a little bit of essential oil or something a bit mentholy inside my mask as well, so that I get that smell. But you've got to be careful. I did that once with Vicks, and my eyes were streaming. I think it was a bit too close to the nose. But a little bit of lavender essential oil or something like that inside the mask. But you do kind of get used to it. And again, if it's a hoarder house and you're there for days, you walk in on day one and the smell really hits you. By the time you've been there a few days, you're walking in and actually you kind of, I don't know if you get used to it or or you just don't smell it anymore. We don't really have a sort of price guide as such. Every job is priced up based on the circumstances, how long it's going to take. The waste removal is often a big factor because it's actually quite expensive for me to dispose of biohazard waste. So if there's going to be a lot of waste removal, that's going to massively impact the price. And it depends on the severity and the nature of the job as well. You can imagine some environments are much more difficult to deal with and much more unpleasant. But just for context, if you are going into say body decomposition clean, or where there's been a big trauma and there's a lot of blood spillage, you're charging hundreds of pounds to even walk through the front door. And then your hourly rate might be £150 an hour after that. So however long it takes, the price would go up. Something like a hoarder house can run into multiple thousands because you might have a team of people in somebody's house for days or even weeks. We've done hoarder houses where we've had 6 or 7 skips. So even again, the waste removal, it really, really does like clock up the price. But it's much more costly than domestic cleaning for the obvious reason. I mean, the chemicals and the PPE, the labour, and just the nature of it warrants a higher price. Yeah, we do have funny stories. So quite often we end up building a really good relationship with the hoarders. If it's a hoarder house, it starts off fairly hostile, and by the end of the week we have quite a lot of banter with them, and we have some funny. And one of the girls that works with me, Kaylee's terrified of spiders, so we always have a bit of a giggle, sending her into a room with a mammoth cobweb or something like that. I've never discovered anything like this, but I know of somebody in the industry that found a chest freezer full of wrapped up poos, individually wrapped. They just don't want to throw away anything. We've had fire alarms go off where we've been in on a job and we've ended up in the middle of the street in our white suits and up to our eyeballs in you know what, and then you're out just on the street because the fire alarm's gone off. So there's all sorts of interesting things that's happened. I think for me, it's something different all the time. I could not imagine anything worse than having the same job day in, day out, dealing with the same people, doing the same thing. For me, I don't like that kind of routine. I like the excitement of not knowing what job I'm going to next. The phone might ring and I'm like, oh, what's it going to be today? Sometimes it's not an exciting job and it's not glamorous. Sometimes it's a sewage leak or something really mundane. But sometimes they are really interesting. And I like the variety. And I also like the fact that I really do genuinely have a massive sense of job satisfaction, because a lot of the jobs that we do are literally changing people's lives. I know that sounds really dramatic, and there's loads of careers where people are changing people's lives all the time. But if you go and help a hoarder, or you save a family from having to clean up after a traumatic incident that they may have to deal with, you don't, you're having a massive impact, and I quite like that as well. I feel like I'm actually making a difference. So initially, when I started my TikTok, I wasn't posting any footage of inside hoarder houses or the cleans, and I still don't post crime scenes or trauma or body decompositions. I just don't think it's appropriate for the internet, and there will be some cleans that I will never post. But what I started to realise with the sort of hoarder type cleans, and where mental health is a factor and where people's welfare are severely impacted, anytime I posted anything remotely of that content, it was really popular. And when I hit 10,000 followers on TikTok, I went on the Creator Fund, and I had a couple of videos go viral, and I thought, actually, I can really do good with my TikTok money, and help people that really need it. So I use my TikTok Creator Fund to do free cleans with permission to film the cleaning process and post the before and afters, and they're always really popular. And then I started to ask the hoarders that I was going to, actually, I've got a social media channel, I'm trying to raise awareness, do you mind if I take a bit of footage, do a bit of filming? most of them don't mind at all. They're like, quite like it. They're like, oh yeah. And I give them updates of how their videos are doing. And people love it. And I think it's a very interesting subject. I mean, fascinating how people live. I think most people are naturally just nosy, and having a look at somebody's living conditions that is perceived by most people as to be shocking is always going to get traction. But also from a sort of mental health point of view, I'm hitting a lot of people that are coming to me and saying, thank you for that post. My mental health's been really bad. I've got severe depression. My house doesn't look dissimilar to the video you posted today, and it's made me feel like I'm not on my own. Thank you for raising awareness. And so I'm really developing a community of people that are benefiting from just seeing the content. It's maybe motivating them to do a little bit of cleaning today where they might not otherwise, making them feel like, I say, they're not on their own, they're not the only one. And then if a video does well and it earns me a few pence or a few quid for the pot for the next free clean, as far as I'm concerned, that can only be a good thing. If I have a really good spell and the algorithm works in my favour and I get a few viral videos, then the pot's obviously got more money in it and I might be able to increase. But I try to do at least one a month. The goal is to do as many free cleans as possible. Like, the more people I can help, the better, because people need it. As you say, it can run into thousands of pounds. It can be costly. And not everybody's got, sometimes funding's available as well, depending on the circumstances, but often it isn't, and not everybody's got thousands of pounds to spend on that, even if they really, really need to have it done.